There we go. So now we can get started officially. Sorry about that, y'all. Okay. So I'm just going to have a few housekeeping rules and introduction, and then we'll turn it over to our panelists. So again, hello, thank you for coming. Properly, now that we're starting, I'd like to start with a land acknowledgement. So this event at the University of New Hampshire is located on Nadakana, the traditional ancestral homeland of the Abenaki, Pennacook, and Wabanaki peoples, past and present. We acknowledge and honor with gratitude the land and waterways and the people who have stewarded Nadakana throughout the generations. We acknowledge that some of these peoples are currently lacking federal recognition and that this land continues to be unceded. Thank you to the New Hampshire Indigenous Collaborative Collective for providing us with that land acknowledgement. And to learn more about them, you can go to indigenousnh.com. So a few housekeeping rules for tonight. First of all, this program is meant to be a conversation. Thank you for coming. Thank you for joining via Zoom. We'll start, like I said, with a brief introduction, move to each panelist's presentation, and then have a question and answer conversation period. As this is a hybrid event, we have community members joining via Zoom, so all audience members will be muted during our panelist presentations and then unmuted during the Q&A to contribute to the conversation and ask their own questions. So to ask a question as a Zoom participant, please use the raise hand function. So this can be found by clicking on the emoji-faced reaction button at the top of your screen. Once you raise your hand, I will unmute you and you can ask your question to the room. This program is being recorded, and if you're attending in person tonight and you need to sign in for credit or anything along those lines, there's a sheet down here, so just grab that before you leave. We'll get started. Thank you again for coming. And tonight's program is the first in a three-part series of community conversations exploring how we situate ourselves within time. It explores new connections between past, presents, and potential futures through the research of faculty and community scholars. The program series is a complement to the Solastalgic Archive and Deep Time Lab exhibition at the Museum of Art on view through December 3rd. The exhibition asks viewers to consider what it means to live in our current era of impact, urgency, and accelerated change. The Deep Time Lab asks us to consider our place in the great expanse of geologic time, vis-a-vis living in an age that reveals that there is not a single predictable future, one knowable past, or one singular present moment. For tonight's program, our three panelists bring diverse research and practice to the idea of the present in our own current era in deep time. Exhibiting artist Nina Elder conceptualizes solastalgia as the feeling of homesickness before leaving home. Tonight's panelists will dig into that feeling and ask where it comes from, what shape it takes, and who has the privilege to feel such loss, create memory, and have ownership over the processes of remembering and forgetting. Our panelists chart the beginnings of humanity's role in planetary accelerated change and its ongoing methods, the impact of this change on the health in our day-to-day lives, and how we can learn to engage with the moment in this time for creative release and artistic expression in order to live more fully in what we are right now. I'm thrilled to introduce our panelists. First is Tu Lan. Tu joined the UNH Department of Geography as an assistant professor in 2015. His research focuses on the ongoing transformation of global capitalism, and he has published articles on topics including the industrial upgrading of China's economy and Chinese apparel manufacturing companies in Italy. Adopting a transnational and comparative perspective, he situates the contemporary political, economic issues in the longer global history of industrialization and technological innovation. At UNH, he teaches courses on and studies international trade, world geography, economic geography of China, and geographical information systems. Next is Cristina Faiver-Serna. Cristina is a Chicana ethnic studies scholar and feminist geographer. She grew up in a Mexican-American household where she was encouraged from an early age to explore higher education as a liberatory pathway, not only for herself, but for her family, community, and those who will come after her. She is currently a postdoctoral diversity and innovation scholar with a dual appointment in the departments of geography and women's and gender studies here at the University of New Hampshire. She specializes in relational studies of race, Latinx studies, women of color feminisms, environmental justice, and public health. Her current research is on community health practices in response to the air pollution and environmental racism in Southern California. Our third panelist tonight is Alexandria Peary. Alexandria serves as the New Hampshire Poet Laureate and is the author of 9 books. Most recently, Prolific Moment, Theory and Practice of Mindfulness for Writing, and the poetry book, Battle of Silicon Valley at Daybreak. Her work has received a 2020 Academy of American Poets Laureate Fellowship and the Iowa Poetry Prize. She's a UNH alum, as she earned her PhD in English from the University of New Hampshire. Her other degrees included a MFA in poetry from the Iowa Writers Workshop and a second MFA in poetry from the University of Massachusetts Amherst. Her specialty is mindful writing, the subject of her TEDx talk, How Mindfulness Can Transform the Way You Write, and other presentations, including a webcast for National Novel Writing Month and her web series for the National Council of Teachers of English. Alex is a professor in the English department at Salem State University. Thank you all for being here. Can you just give me 1 second with this projector? And 2, ready to go.
All right, let's get started. So first, I would like to thank Molly for organizing this wonderful panel. It's my great pleasure to participate in the event and share with you my thoughts about this very inspirational topic about time, and this also very interesting exhibition by Nina Elder and our Arts Museum. When Molly talked to me about the possibility of participating in this event, I was a little bit surprised because I think myself as perhaps the least artistic person in my department. So I study boring topics of economic geography. That's why let me just speak from an economic geographical perspective to provide you some interesting insights about time in our days from a industrialization perspective. Honestly, I never heard of the word solastalgia until Molly introduced me to the exhibition. I apologize for my ignorance. Then I went on searching for the meaning of the word. Molly, could you please to the next?
Oh, yeah.
Yes,
Let me know.
thank you. I did a search on Google Ngram, which is a search engine for historical use of English words. It looks like solastalgia was invented in the late 1990s and became popular only in the early 2000s. After knowing its meaning, please to move to the next slide. Thank you. After knowing its meaning, I would like to argue that solastalgia is perhaps not a new phenomenon, certainly not as new as early 2000s. And please also allow me to make a very bold argument that solastalgia has been a result of what we call industrialization or industrial revolution. The feeling of homesickness before leaving home, as I quote from our artist Nina Elder, can be traced back to perhaps English Romanticism in the late 18th century and early 19th century. We have an expert English professor here. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Exemplified by this famous poem by William Blake. Now, Blake, as some of you may know, very much hated industrialization and was appalled by these ugly chimneys, as you can see on my slide, of the textile mills in Manchester, England. Next slide, please. If we agree that solastalgia is a result of industrialization, then we can ask some very interesting questions. Is solastalgia a universal feeling for all people in all places around the world? If the experience of industrialization is itself geographically diverse, as my research will show, shouldn't the feeling towards industrialization also be geographically diverse? Next slide, please. Now here, I would like to introduce my own research about the apparel industry in Italy. If you've ever visited Europe, especially Southern Europe, you should be familiar with these street stalls selling clothing and leather goods. If you look at the label, you will probably find the Made in Italy label. Most of them, I would say 90% of them are made in Italy. Next slide, please. In fact, the majority of these made in Italy garment and leather goods, even by the so-called high fashion brands such as Gucci and Prada, are made in and around the city called Prato in the central region of Tuscany. It's about 30 minutes northwest of the city of Florence by train. Next slide, please. Prato is today home to Europe's largest fast fashion manufacturing hub. Majority of the garment firms are owned by Chinese nationals. There are about 37,000 Chinese immigrants currently living in the city as of 2022. In 2019, Chinese nationals own 6,202 companies, in which about 4,000 were in the garment industry. Most of these Chinese people, both entrepreneurs and workers, came from a city called Wenzhou, located in the southeastern coast of China. Next slide, please. Arriving in Prato in 1990s, the Chinese immigrants first worked for Italian companies and then gradually became their own boss for a variety of reasons. Many workers were documented workers at the beginning, and many worked 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, especially in the peak season. Through hard work or indeed self-exploitation, they finally dominated the garment industry by the 2010s. As a result, social tensions rose. Next slide, please. Italian police, especially, intensified their investigation on Chinese businesses looking for, of course, undocumented workers and irregular labor conditions. And racial discrimination against Chinese also rose in the local community. And for the first time in history, in response to this rising xenophobia, Prato elected its first ever right-wing mayor in 2009, after decades of being a leftist stronghold. For those of you who may know the Italian history, this place, Prato, and area surrounding Florence used to be a stronghold of the Italian Communist Party in the 60s and 70s. So it was quite a dramatic change. This past election in Italy, I think Prato also voted for the right-wing party. Next slide, please. But there is more in this story. Prato is by no means new to this phenomenon. The workplaces where Chinese immigrants run their family business were in fact originally built by local Italian families between the 1950s and 1970s for exactly the same purpose of family-based flexible production. This is one example of the house, the picture, I took the picture this past summer. This is one example of the house located on the outskirts of the city. It was originally built by an Italian family in the 1960s for their own textile business and to house migrant workers, especially from southern Italy. Today, it's a little garment factory for a Chinese family of 6. Next slide, please. Although Prato was the center of textile production during the Renaissance, it only started to industrialize in the 1950s. Its first textile companies recycle woolen fabrics imported from more developed countries such as UK and the US. Only in the 1980s, when Italy became itself a developed country, young Italians left the textile industry for better work-life balance and higher income. These pictures I show the Italian garbage pickers working 12 hours a day, 7 days a week on recycled fabrics. And they tried to turn these recycled fabrics into cheap clothing, then exported them to UK and the US. Next slide, please. The past industrialization has not been forgotten, of course, by the Italians. In Prado's Textile Museum, these two are pictures I took in the Textile Museum. There is an exhibition showing the humble beginning of the Made in Italy product. In the 1960s, Prado was famous for its smelly river and slum-like neighborhoods. It was laughed at by the French as Italy's Hong Kong, quote unquote. Perhaps that's why Italians still don't like the French, especially in the fashion sector. If someone must be solastalgic about the past, it's certainly not Italians. Next slide, please. Since the late 2010s, young Chinese immigrants also started leaving this industry for better life. Thanks to rising living standard in China, fewer and fewer Chinese immigrants came to Italy too. Today, immigrants from Pakistan and Nigeria are taking up job vacancies left by the Chinese workers in the garment factory. Maybe in the next decade or two, Pakistanis and Nigerians will become, again, the protagonists of Prado's garment industry. Next slide, please. So let me reiterate my argument. Solastalgia may not be a universal feeling for all people in all places around the world. For Italians, and perhaps increasingly for Chinese, they may have the chance to reflect on the negative impacts brought by the textile industry. They may remember the past as the good old days. But the vast majority from South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa still do not have this privilege. They will likely repeat what Italians and Chinese did and work for their own economic development. In other words, change induced by industrialization is too fast for some, but still too slow for others. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, that was just so great. Thank you too.
Thank you too.
All right, can folks hear me okay? Wow, that was so great. It's a thrill for me to get to hear Dr. Wang's research in this forum, as we are colleagues in the Department of Geography. Hi everyone, thanks for coming. I can do that. It's an honor to be here with my fellow panelists. Thank you to the Museum of Art for this generous invitation to share about my work in this forum. And special thanks to Molly for her vision and organization of this whole event. Next slide, please.
Sorry about that.
Oh, no, that's okay. Next slide, actually. Yeah, it's okay. So it's fitting, since you did such a beautiful land acknowledgement, but we have new guests here. I will also do a land acknowledgement. Before I begin, I want to invite everyone to join me in acknowledging and honoring Ndakina, the land and waterways we are on, and the Abenaki, Wabanaki, and Pennacook peoples past and present, stewards of this land since time immemorial. I also want to encourage folks to also check out indigenousnh.com to learn more about Indigenous New Hampshire. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm going to start with a story. In spring 2011, I was driving south between Los Angeles and Long Beach, California. For those who aren't familiar with this landscape, Los Angeles County is massive. And Long Beach, California is actually the second largest city in the county of Los Angeles. Los Angeles City is the largest city in the county. Okay, so I was driving to a meeting first thing on a weekday where I was going to present on this new grant funded program that I was managing at a federally qualified community health center in Long Beach. At the time, I was a director of health education and outreach for this community health center. The program, Bridge to Health, was a community health worker-led program out of our clinic for our patients who were recently diagnosed with asthma. For those who don't know, federally qualified health centers are community health centers that receive both private funds, like this particular grant, as well as federal funds. They accept private insurance and they accept public insurance. They're the only surviving institution in the US, and we're made to be so, that is a true medical safety net. They won't turn you away, and they serve medically underserved areas and populations. These are geographic designations where the primary care provider to population ratio is extremely low. Okay, so this particular morning, I was headed on the freeway, just like this, to a grantees meeting at the Port of Long Beach. The Bridge to Health program was an $800,000 3-year community health air pollution mitigation grant. Okay, the aim of Bridge to Health and the goal of the community health workers working with each family at a time was to manage a child's asthma. Asthma is an epidemic in Southern California. So epidemic is local, right? Pandemic, we all know now, is global. So asthma is an epidemic in Southern California, particularly in Black, Latinx, Asian, and Indigenous communities there. Next slide. Okay, so I was headed to the Port of Long Beach in the yellow on the 710 freeway, which was built specifically for the port. It's built in the 1950s specifically for the port. It starts right along the Los Angeles River. You can see the waterway going up, and it just goes straight from the port inland, 23 miles. So the Los Angeles port and the Long Beach port, these are twin ports of Southern California. They are right next to each other. They're both massive. And together they bring in 43% of imported goods into the continental US. It's the lower 48, where goods are shipped off as far as Chicago, Illinois. Not quite over here, but pretty close considering how massive the US is. The 710 freeway is the main truck route from the Port of Long Beach to inland distribution centers in San Bernardino County. The global goods movement, so this global import, export all around the world, this global goods movement is a highly local and highly racialized phenomenon throughout the Southern California region. Oops. So anyway, on this next slide. Yeah, sorry. So on this particular morning, I was driving down the 710, that's what this is, 2011, and sat in my car. I was sandwiched between two big rig trucks on their way, headed back to the port to pick up more cargo. They go up and down the freeway all day long. I was breathing in the recycled air in my car with that false sense of security that it was clean and it was safe. And I had a devastating thought. I thought, this is blood money. And I felt this panic rise up in my gut. And I thought, was it? So I sat there in my car on the way to this meeting where I was going to present to all these community stakeholders and, you know, our funder, the Port of Long Beach, like all this good that we were doing with all of the port's money that they were giving them. So I started listing the things in my head, helping alleviate the pain and harm caused by air pollution, the life difficulties exacerbated by it, from little kids experiencing asthma attacks, babies struggling to breathe, and their mom doesn't know why, kids missing school, parents missing work, and crucial paychecks, Parents being scared for their kids, staying up all night, listening, making sure they're breathing okay, not knowing what to do. The community health workers who were the linchpin of our program, they were making an incredible difference in these people's lives. But yes, it was blood money. So in my research, I asked two overarching questions. The first big question that I ask are, what are the systems and structures that produce and perpetuate environmental, racial, and gender injustice? And of course, we know these are all entangled. So in other words, what about uneven distribution of power produces and reproduces geographies of injustice? The second question I ask is, how is justice reinscribed in the landscapes and in people's lives despite all that is against it, right? So really I'm asking, what about resistance? Next slide. Okay, so in 2009, the city of Long Beach Harbor Commissioners, so this is a publicly appointed board of commissioners. So technically, you know, these are state representatives. They're all folks that like come from the port and they're appointed to oversee the port. They approved this $750 million Middle Harbor expansion project for the Port of Long Beach. And as a concession to community pressure from environmental justice activists, the port was directed to funnel 15 million. That's 2% of their projected budget for this project. 2% to air pollution mitigation funds. So the port drew boundaries, and that's this map that you're seeing, for the most impacted areas of Long Beach and the surrounding communities, and distributed this map as a guide for organizations like the one that I worked for to apply for funding. So they showed us this map and they said, how are you gonna, impact the most people in this map? So a little over 5 million was distributed to healthcare organizations and public agencies serving children and seniors, like the one that I worked for. Our clinic had promised a very wide and meaningful reach, dependent mostly on the labor of, again, just 2 community health workers, promotoras de salud, who would work with families one by one, teach them how to manage their child's asthma. Everything from managing your indoor environment, using some of the funds to buy folks HEPA filters, which we're all now more familiar with, right? Getting rid of carpet, helping them advocate to their landlord. Can you please rip out the carpet? It's harboring dust mites that triggering the kids' asthma. Learning how to really properly take your inhaler with a spacer, which is a device that you put in your mouth, and then you put the inhaler at the end of it, and it helps you take the medicine so it goes all the way deep down into your lungs. So doing all of these things, this is what the promotoras did. Helping them how to teaching them how to manage their kids' asthma. And asthma, that it was no secret at this point in time that it was caused by the concentration of port pollution in parts of Long Beach and the surrounding communities that were majority Mexican, Latinx, as well as Cambodian and African American. So while there are laws and regulatory policy, agencies at various scales, right, overseeing emissions, what we largely know since Executive Order 12898, which is the Environmental Justice Executive Order that President Clinton signed in 1994. President Obama, re-signed it in 2015 as this way to kind of try to get federal agencies to work together to focus on improving, communities towards environmental justice. What we know, since lots of these programs have been evaluated, et cetera, things have not gotten better. Industries continue to pollute at dangerous, deathly levels, disproportionately in Black, Latinx, Indigenous, and poor communities around the US. So in other words, marginalized communities marginalized on, from economic and political power. They serve as dumping grounds for the sake of corporate profit. Okay, so this is a picture of the Middle Harbor expansion completed in 2016. It cost more than twice what it was estimated to cost in 2009. It was estimated at $750 million. It cost $1.62 billion. So when environmental justice activists in 2009 appealed to the Board of Commissioners, appealed to the state representatives, they appealed in the language of public health. And this was because there was, and perhaps still is, maybe naively, an assumption that state authorities have the public's best interest in mind with regard to health, to public health. That public health services are helpful, sometimes they are. And that public health and the state generally are working toward similar, if not the same goals as environmental justice activists. Now, this is in part because public health theory is derived from a social justice framework. But that framework is not used in state public health policy implementation. And I think I probably don't have to over-explain that in light of the last few years. This is because the state is reliant and invested in capitalism. It requires capitalist profit. And you've got all these folks, like with the Board of Commissioners, you've got all these port folks coming in and overseeing the port itself as state representatives. So ultimately, these goals of any kind of precautionary public health policy, environmental justice, and profit, these are not compatible goals. In the case of the port expansion, despite numerous, even other state representatives from environmental regulatory agencies coming in and testifying and saying, this is going to be bad for community health. This is going to be bad for regional health. The Board of Commissioners had actually already made up their minds. They went on a press tour the week before. And they were talking to press saying, oh, this is such a great thing. It's our own little stimulus package. The port expansion was viewed as good for the economy and therefore fully supported. And I'm happy to talk more about this in the Q&A. Next slide, please. I also want to address the reasons why public health services are so needed to combat the effects of air pollution. So diesel trucks driving up and down a 23-mile stretch of highway multiple times a day, up and down the 710 freeway, in a densely populated urban environment where parks, schools, and neighborhoods are close to the freeway. And we had a clinic in a school that was literally right near an on-ramp onto the freeway. Diesel trucks emit a dense amount of air pollution. Diesel pollution produces two categories of dangerous particles: fine particulate pollution and ultrafine particulate pollution. So fine particulate pollution is regulated. This is one of 6 kinds of pollution that's regulated by the Environmental Protection Agency, monitored nationally, and it's like hyper monitored in California, especially around the ports. It's dangerous because it's literally invisible particles that are laced with all kinds of toxic chemicals. It gets lodged in your lungs, and it has the ability to make you very sick, cause disease like asthma, altering the biochemical function of your body. Ultrafine particulate pollution, which is the stuff at the very, very top that you probably can't even see, which you can't see it. Ultrafine particulate pollution is even more dangerous. It's much smaller than fine particulate pollution. It doesn't only get lodged in your lungs, it actually disrupts at a cellular level. So if you remember from high school biology, the mitochondria is the powerhouse of your cell. It actually is proven to disrupt the mitochondria. So it bypasses the uterine lining, so it affects a fetus in utero, and it affects your brain functioning too. It's highly toxic and it's dangerous. Scientists in Southern California and scientists in China have been ringing the alarm about the presence and danger of ultrafine particulate pollution for over 20 years, but it continues to be unregulated. Makes people really sick, makes kids really sick. Kids are particularly susceptible because young children breathe at a higher rate than adults. So their respiratory rate is higher than adults. So they're breathing in more pollution during the same exposure time. And that's exacerbated by the fact that they're smaller. So there's less surface area to cover. And they're still growing and developing. I mean, our brains develop until we're like 25, 26, 27. And kids play outside more often, right? So they're exposed to more pollution. But the problem is as is the problem with so much of the climate crisis today, is that the people who have been most at risk due to environmental degradation for a long time, talk about industrial revolution, are also on the margins of political and economic power. So they have less of a say, right? Not only in the US, but around the world. It's Black, Indigenous, Latinx kids, immigrants, poor communities, disabled people, et cetera, here in the US. Those on the margins of power who live in the dumping grounds of the worst of our climate crisis and pay the steepest price for the sake of economic growth. Okay, so ultimately, this is Carolina. She is an extraordinary human being, extraordinary promotora, and I was very privileged to work with her for 3 years and continue to learn from her. So ultimately, the port relied on our community health worker-led program, relied on the labor of Carolina and other programs like it to mitigate their pollution for their $1.62 billion expansion. Community health workers implement a politics of care in their communities. And this disrupts this urban geography that wasn't designed or built for human and ecological life to flourish. It was built for the movement of goods. Like I said, the 710 freeway was built in 1950s. It was built for the movement of goods. It was built for this massive growth to occur as it has. Promotoras describe their work, and Carolina always says this, as leading from the heart. They immerse themselves in the science and the health education, not only to get it right, but so they can really create a support system for families who are literally and figuratively struggling to breathe. They empower families to take better care of their own and inspire them to get involved at the community, the local, and even the state level in the fight for environmental justice. Some of our families have gone on to advocate at the state capitol. So, you know, mostly I presented on the problem, right? But the takeaway I want to give you is this, is when we are looking for solutions to these big problems, to environmental and climate injustice, and when I say that there's this disjuncture between the state public health authority, environmental policy, and community needs for justice, what really needs to happen is for the needs of the most marginalized groups to rise to the top. If we take care of them, we will take care of the rest of us. Thank you.
Alex, I'll turn it over to you now.
I don't have a microphone, but I have a very loud voice. So can you hear me? I may end up standing because I feel better breathing when I'm standing than sitting, but is the microphone required for the video recording? Okay, so just let me know, just wave or something if you can't hear me, okay? We're all good? So I'll be talking about mindful writing, and I want to thank Molly too for inviting me to this. It's delightful hearing the three of you speak. I teach a graduate and an undergraduate course on mindful writing at my institution, but I also, as poet laureate of the state, regularly do mindful writing in the community as a social practice. And I want to say, P.S., that it's not just for creative writing, it's for all writing one does. So, mindful writing. So, Too many of us treat writing like public speaking. Is it okay if I stand? Because I can't breathe when I'm crouching down, so. Too many of us treat writing like public speaking, like what I'm doing right now. That is, too many of us forego the privacy and rhetorical affordances, or the powerful tools of writing, the rhetorical tools of the present moment, in exchange for a host of stressors. And I say it's a poor bargain. Almost every writing problem, no matter what you're writing, can be chalked up to mindlessness, or overlooking the present moment while writing. Mindlessness, not mindfulness, is our human default position. In fact, I taught an undergraduate class today on mindful writing. I presumably meditated with them, and I can tell you that although I'm noticing you and I'm seeing you, I am not actually mindful at this moment. I will let you know when I actually become mindful. I'm not. I look like I'm here, right? But actually I'm not. So mindlessness, not mindfulness, is our human default position. It's how we operate. I'm starting to be here. But how we operate our lives. The average ability to stay present has been clocked in at lasting between a whopping 5 and 12 seconds before the mind moves away from real-time events. One study suggests that we spend 47%, and I think that's generous, 47% of our everyday lives not being present aware. We operate on autopilot while involved in countless activities. We mindlessly brush our teeth, mindlessly cross rooms, mindlessly gesture, mindlessly talk, mindlessly open our email and check our phones, mindlessly drive, mindlessly shop, mindlessly eat and drink, feed our pets, etc. So why should writing be any different? In fact, it's not. Writing is easily one of those routine daily activities that most of us handle without awareness of our present moments. The problem with mindlessness and writing is that its impact is arguably much more detrimental in the short and long term than mindlessly brushing our teeth, although maybe our dentist or dental hygienist would argue with me with that. The other problem, although I'm a professor, I will say this, is that years of our schooling have reinforced, built up our mindlessness as people who write. So it's not the same as brushing our teeth. We've had years of training to be mindless writers. You've been trained as a mindless writer. I was trained to be a mindless writer. We've all been trained to be mindless writers. And so mindfulness, according to John Kabat-Zinn, is the non-judgmental observation of the ever-changing present moment. To repeat, it's the non-judgmental observation of the ever-changing present moment. You probably, just hearing that basic definition of mindfulness, might sense some of the benefits to writing already. Non-judgmental, couldn't we all use a little of that, right? Also ever-changing might be of interest to you, trigger some interest, but especially around the area of not being judged. We get judged all the time for our writing. What mindful writing does is fundamental. It's a game changer. It restores present temporality or present timing to our awareness as we write. Mindful writing entails the non-judgmental, detached observation of the ever-changing writing situation for the purposes of invention, for the purposes of revising, for the purposes of receiving and using feedback, and even finishing work. It can be used at every phase of the writing process, from verbal emptiness or the pre-verbal to the so-called final drafts. Every moment is inventive. Every moment is prolific if present temporality is noticed. Mindful writing adds mindful awareness to that common activity. It's actually very pragmatic, applied mindfulness, similar to how practitioners do mindful walking, mindful eating, mindful speech, mindful listening, anything to get mindfulness off of the meditation cushion and making it part of a lived human experience. So mindful writing can be used across disciplines and in any genre. It is not exclusive to the more imaginary or personal kinds of writing. A little background here. I suffered for years from a writing block, hence the passion for this topic, right? Years. It's something documented in my TEDx talk if you want to check it out. I went to Iowa at age 22. That is the most competitive school in the country for creative writing. It was extremely nerve-wracking for myself and other people. People just stopped writing, right? This continued on and on and on until I had a fundamental breakthrough in my 30s, it was that late, in which I realized that I had to occupy the present moment at the desk. And ever since then, I, except for one little bout, which I won't get into here, one little bout, have not suffered from writing blocks anymore. When I came here for my PhD at UNH, I had 2 babies. I was pregnant, gave birth twice. I had a full-time job directing a college writing program, and I was a doctoral student, and I didn't have a problem writing the entire time. So it came of use when I was here, and it still does. I wrote at 4:30 this morning. I'll get at 4:30 tomorrow morning. It is the joy of my life. It is the joy of my life, minus my kids. Kids, if you're watching tonight, you are also the joy of my life. Okay, and husband. Okay, so mindlessness. Okay, so here's the deal with mindlessness. It forecloses on opportunity. When we're not aware of the present while we write, it forecloses on opportunity. It causes blindness. We're operating with a blindfold on. We have a belief in limited resources, as described by the theorist Ellen Langer, who has written quite a bit on mindful learning, not mindful writing, but mindful learning. We can't see our immediate resources or choices because all we see, you can probably guess, if we're not looking at the present, we're looking at the past or future, grades, judgment, evaluation, the consequences of our writing. Maybe we're thinking about how our writing has been previously criticized or graded or rejected. With present awareness, a whole new toolkit or whole new set of rhetorical affordances come to the foreground. These are powerful resources that are not taught in conventional writing education. These affordances, again, are not taught in conventional education, and they are things like noticing impermanence, self-talk, and embodiment. So with impermanence, I'm going to go through briefly what these tools are that come to the foreground. Again, what I'm trying to say is this: when you notice the present, you start noticing a whole bunch of things that aren't taught in the classroom, tools for writing, impermanence, constant change, embodiment, and probably the most important is our monkey minds or our constant inner chatter. So I'm going to run through a few of these. Impermanence, everything in the world changes, including your writing. This lets people produce quantity and not be fixed always on standards. It helps us utilize change to revise. And probably the most important thing for me about impermanence is that we see that our writing abilities and our writing problems are never static. Nobody is one thing ever as a writer. It constantly shifts, constantly shifts. The second tool that comes to the foreground is self-talk or intrapersonal rhetoric. In a lot of classes, people teach interpersonal rhetoric, that is communicating from one person to the other. With a mindfulness perspective, we notice intrapersonal, how we are always using language on ourselves. Anybody who's spent any time on a meditation cushion will tell you that within 30 seconds to a minute, you start talking to yourself. Language arises, images arise. So this internal talk, monkey mind, here's to deal with it. It's two-faced. First off, it provides endless content. You wait, there's going to be language that surfaces. If you are detached and non-judgmental enough to perceive it, there is a river of language constantly going through our minds. Always have something to write. But as I mentioned to you, it is two-faced, Janus-faced. It's your frenemy. So on one part, it provides you content material. But the other thing is that we are constantly sending ourselves messages about our own writing ability in the writing moment. It's a form of self-pathos. You might recognize the word pathos from your writing classes when people try to move other people's emotions. Well, guess what? Our monkey minds are constantly moving our own emotions inside. So this self-pathos causes a few things to happen here. One, we act as though an audience is physically present when we write. There is nobody present when you write. When you write, you are talking to yourself. You are behaving as though an audience who you are creating with your self-talk is arriving from the future to sit at the edge of your desk. They peer over your laptop and watch you write. And the problem with that audience demon or reader ghost, based on Mara, who plagued the Buddha, the problem with this is that that audience ghost or reader demon is a creature from the future, the teacher, the editor, the journal, or the publication house. And that creature from the future isn't interested in your messy drafts or how you're doing on your inventing of this paper or whatnot. They want the final product right now because they're from the future, for crying out loud. But the problem is, you haven't had time to write it. You haven't had time to write it. So what ends up happening is people are haunted by the future, these audience demons and reader ghosts. They act as though they are public speaking, like me, cannot retract words, can't say, oh, I don't like what I just said. I'm going to freeze everybody's mind and take those words out and put different words on. They act as though they're being watched in real time as they write. So people procrastinate, they erase a lot while they write. Anything is more appealing than writing, doing the litter box, getting your oil changed, all kinds of things are more appealing than writing because it is stressful. And the second thing that happens is in that self-talk, we are constantly telling ourselves preconceptions. We're gambling on the next moment as though we know what's going to happen with our writing ability in the next moment. That's the second thing. So as I mentioned to you, that self-talk, two-faced, gives you content, but it also fosters these audience demons and reader ghosts and gives us preconceptions about our writing ability. Did I mention those preconceptions are also two-part? One thing is it's about the task you're working on right now, that paper, that article, that book, that poem right now. You have all kinds of messages you're sending yourself that pass mindlessly through you and affect your process. But preconceptions can also be about how you feel you do at a type of writing in general. Oh, I suck at introductions, or I'm great at poems in general, and it will shape how you proceed. And let's see, the other thing briefly I want to say is embodiment. What does embodiment mean? It means the awareness of your body as you write, which I think I would guess most of you have not heard before in conversation. Paramount is the breathing, because here's the deal. As soon as you start noticing your physicality right now, breathing is the easiest. This is why people who meditate watch their breathing. You are here. So just for a minute here, everybody notice your wrist. We all have hands. So just notice one of your wrists just now. By noticing that small part of you, you start grounding yourself in the present moment, because we don't breathe. I hope you do, of course. We don't breathe in the future. You didn't breathe in the past. You breathe now. So anything physical, embodied, puts us in the present moment. And again, as I'm trying to tell you, present moment is a wonderful space for any kind of writing. So it's also energizing. I want to say that it is absolutely draining to have this constant mindlessness where we off-road to the future, to the past. It's absolutely draining. And especially as we age, the longer we're in school, it becomes more and more draining. This is why people do not like to write. This is why if you're an English professor like myself and you go to a cocktail party, you duck when somebody says, what do you do for a living? Because you're bound to hear, what do you think? I hate writing, or I'm not very good at writing. It's like this cliche that comes out of everybody's mouth, right? I wonder what people say to you guys at parties. Okay, so geology cliches. Okay, so here's the thing. It is far from easy to do mindful writing. You can't just, oh, I'm going to be mindful. It takes a lot of practice. It takes pedagogy. It takes becoming part of a curriculum. I teach whole courses on this. So it's really part of a vigorous training. That's why I teach these classes. We do a whole host of activities that get students having experiences with those rhetorical affordances, doing desk meditations. They spend the entire semester trying to reside, it's very hard, in the present as they write. And as I mentioned to you, this goes against the human proclivity to be mindless. We tend to go off-road. So I want to say that what we're after here, though, so my classes, I am a Buddhist, but I do not teach Buddhism. Here's why. We are after, with mindful writing, productive mindlessness. We are after productive mindlessness. I want my students and I want myself to get so, and I'm sure you want this for yourselves, to get so wrapped up in your writing that you enter a state of flow. You know that feeling where you're nodding, where hours go by or 20 minutes go by and you're like, oh, wow, that went really well, right? But here's the deal. We use mindfulness as a muscle to get us into that state, to get us beyond all the hindrances that come from past and future thinking. You get in that state of flow. But if you do not return as a mindful writing practitioner to the moment, you will inevitably become beached on the shore of writing inability. You need to go back to mindfulness and it spins you out again into flow, into productivity. So we're after this productive state of mindlessness with this process. And, here's the amazing thing about it. This is how I want to close. Again, I teach whole classes. I do stuff in the community with mindful writing. It's a different way of teaching. It's a different experience for writers. I honestly feel that if people have even 3 minutes experience in their curriculum with this method, it will change how they perceive with writing, possibly for the short term and possibly long term for the rest of their writing lives. Just a simple practice, 5 minutes in a class you teach, can help people see writing differently. We need to remember to be present. And we're more likely to do so the next time we write. We set an intention to be present at the desk. And your ability to write, when you do this, your ability to write is always present. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexandria. That was great. So I'm just going to start looking at some of the questions on Zoom and get that rolling. But in the meantime, I thought if we have questions in the audience or comments, please feel free, raise your hand, shout them out. Yeah, in the back.
Well, I guess it's more a comment than a question. My class and I brought my class here. We came in late. We couldn't find the room. And so I missed the initial definition of the panel and the idea of solastalgia. So I kind of looked it up quickly and I learned that it has to do with the feeling of emotional distress at industrial change or development. And with that in mind, I guess I'm wondering if the three of you could perhaps say something about interconnections amongst your papers. I mean, I know that there's a certain amount of randomness to this, or not randomness, but it's chance, but I feel I saw some connections. So my comment, I'll try and bring it to a close. My comment number one is, I felt in a way as though, Tulan, the feelings that you were talking about, I got less of a sense of feelings than I did of, I don't know, a kind of general flow of mindlessness about the past. And I wondered if maybe what you were asking was, are there other ways to be more mindful about the layers of history in this place? Or are the people mindful in ways that you noticed, I presume you visited? I also wondered a little bit about people's feelings about living near the port. I have a good friend who grew up near a steel town, a steel mill. Her father worked there, but when it closed and there was no more pollution in the air, everyone was depressed because it meant that there was no more work, right? So people were actually affectively attached to that pollution in a way. I wondered if you could say a bit about that. I don't know. Anyway, I just hope that goes somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah, just feel free, hop on.
Right. Thank you, Smita. I think that's a great question. I think I think you asked several questions. I would like to maybe just respond to the one question specifically, I think towards me, my research about the whether or not these people were mindful about their past. I think you may refer to, for instance, local Italians and the local Chinese, and maybe the Pakistanis and Nigerians as well. I think to a certain extent, they all are mindful about their past, but in different ways. What I think local pratis, certainly they built the museum, they had a museum, the textile museum, documenting the past. And they were not shameful, of course, about what they've been through in the past 100 years. All these hard work, all these pollutions. There were a lot of pollutions in today's beautiful Florence, today's beautiful Tuscany, during the 60s and 70s. They have all those documents, and they teach their kids about those history, of course. I think that's for sure. The Chinese immigrants are also mindful about their past, but from a different perspective. Most of these people were, I should say, peasants when they grew up in China. So they came to Italy to seek for better life, just like many other immigrants, including immigrants in the United States. They, of course, they were mindful of their past in the rural area in China, and they were mindful of the sacrifice they made, both to themselves and to their family. Many of them had I should say, quite a dysfunctional family throughout their life. They sent their kids back to China to their grandparents, to their grandparents. So many kids didn't see their parents for years, and there were a lot of human sacrifice in there. And they worked long hours, and because they want to make enough money for their family. And today, Pakistanis, Nigerians as well. I would say that I met a couple Pakistani workers just this past summer, and they told me that they already told me that they're unlike the Chinese, the Pakistani immigrants are mostly on their own. They do not bring their families over. Most of them are male, unlike in the Chinese community, the gender ratio is about half and half. So they, of course, they made a great sacrifice, human sacrifice, and they, of course, are always missing their hometown in Pakistan and for Nigerians in Nigeria. So I think they are certainly mindful of these. But in another sense, they are also mindless, because when they start working, 12 hours a day. At the peak season, they just work. They were overwhelmed by the work. I don't want to say there is a hierarchy of work in there. The work they do is by no means inferior than the work that we academics do, right? We write, sometimes we procrastinate, often. They also have the same problems, but I think I'm not expert on this specific idea of mindful or mindless work, but I think maybe that's the answer that you want to hear. Yeah, so that's just my thoughts.
Thank you. Well, they were both very rich talks and,
Thank you.
yeah. So thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm just thinking now about this framework that you've given us to think through not only, you know, our research areas, but just so many things. So thank you for that. I'm just thinking about a couple things. I'm thinking about the truck drivers who testified against the port expansion, because even though the port employs them, or they're contractors with the port, they live in this area. And at this point in 2009, it was well known, and even more so now, it was well known in 2009 that the port's pollution was making kids sick. So, you know, and then I'm thinking about an interview that one of the port truck drivers contractors did with a local NPR station back in 2014, where he talked about, you know, that he drives these trucks and he knows they're dirty and he knows they're polluting these communities, and he's just trying to pay for his kid to go to UCLA so that she doesn't have to live near the port anymore. So, you know, and now, you know, you've got these kids coming up in Southern California, not only in Long Beach, but then in San Bernardino County, where all these distribution centers are, and there's tons of pollution out there too. And those are primarily Latinx communities as well. And you've got all these middle schoolers, high schoolers, and college age students who are coming up, and they are environmental justice activists. And the last,
But like warehouses?
yeah,
Is it
warehouses.
distribution
Mhm, yeah.
centers?
And then the last thing I'll just say is that, you know, we would always say that at the clinic that our goal was that we didn't have to be doing this work. The goal was that you didn't have to be out there, you know, teaching kids how to take their asthma medication. So thank you for that question.
Alexandria, did you want to add anything to that question? From your side? Yeah, I think there was another hand in the room. Did someone else have a question? Before? Okay, great. It doesn't look like anyone on Zoom has a question, so I want to ask a question to the whole panel. And this point that kept coming up, and what I heard you all saying in different ways, and again, why I wanted you all to speak on this panel, was this idea of productivity in the moment. And I think what you all showed is that productivity in this present moment, and again, in the context of what we're talking about with solastalgic, but also just being productive, and what does it mean? And it can mean so many things, especially when we're digging into this idea that we're creating each moment, whether it's with our mindfulness practice, whether it's with our what we're purchasing, or how our family is part of these huge transnational corporate goods and commodity networks, but also what it means for our health day to day. And what does it mean when, if the point of this entire program series is to dig into one segment of this huge expanse of geologic time, what I'm hearing from this panel today, and what I love, and thank you all so much, is that the idea of productivity in this place right now is what keeps coming up, and what maybe that's the work for all of us moving forward is what does it mean for ourselves as we evaluate our place in this huge piece of time, but also amongst these transnational networks, amongst the health of communities and individuals and children, and just for ourselves, for living with ourselves in our own skin and our own practices daily. And I think in my notes, I just have like productivity down the whole page and what it all means. So does that also help to answer your question in the back?
Yeah, it does. It does.
Okay, great. Yeah, I know you missed the beginning, and yeah, sorry about that. Did you have a follow-up from their answers? Did you want to add anything? You good back there? Okay.
I have a lot of thoughts, which is a great thing, but I won't inflict them on you. I won't inflict my stream of consciousness on you right now. Thanks.
Molly, I do have something I'd like to say to that.
Yeah.
So it connects here, and it's this, that in my courses, so I'm teaching this undergrad course right now in mindful writing, and they are on the self-pathos, the internal rhetoric, the intrapersonal phase. And they had done an essay on the audience demon or reader ghost, a caricature of somebody that they regularly import to their desk. And it's very cathartic for them. And I even have them at one point write a letter to somebody, they crumple it all up and they like throw it on the floor, but then they pick it up after class so nobody else has to do that. So here's my point. The next week we do our gratitude unit, and we talk about interbeing and intertextuality in writing. So interbeing, Thich Nhat Hanh's expression about how everything is interconnected. There is no independent arising, we're all. And then intertextual, same thing with documents and language. And so we watched this great TEDx talk, last name is Jacobs, and you Google it later on, about thanking everybody for his cup of coffee, who brought him his cup. It's a beautiful TED talk. And so they watch it, and then I have them, they're sitting in the classroom, and we just brainstorm like crazy. Everything that put us in that room, that moment in October in Salem, Massachusetts, down to the people who designed the pavement in the roads that took them to commute to the college, to their mother who did how many hours of work, to the person who let women become educated in this country, to the person who designed that Victorian building we're studying in, to the person who designed fluorescent lighting. We could go on forever what put us in that room, and then we could turn it to writing, all the things that impacted our writing and our education and what brought us to that moment. It is endless, and obviously we don't spend endless amount of time doing this, but the point is that it just shows this big web of interconnection and how we're all so independent and mutually affecting of one another. And that's the amazing thing I heard from your presentations. I have a daughter who wants to go into fashion, so I was writing down what you were saying, this town in Italy, because when I get home, I want to talk to her about it. She's very eco-conscious, an 18-year-old, about the fashion industry. And then what you were saying struck me so much when you were in that car between the two, Cristina, when you were in that car between those two semi-trucks, and how it seemed like this moment crystallized your awareness of the meeting you were about to go to. And I was really struck by that, and yeah.
That's where my perception of everything I had been working towards. I did my, in school, I came up through, I was interested in health. So I started in kinesiology. So I want to be a PT, and then my world shifted and I was introduced to Latinx studies. And then I went back into the health arena and public health, and I thought, okay, this is my social justice path. And in that moment, my whole entire perception of what I was doing cracked. So,
Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. Can I build on a little bit of what you? Yeah.
So I just want to say, like, this idea of interconnectivity and thinking about like the classroom as this space. The classroom is like a space to practice what we do out in the world, right? Beyond the classroom. The classroom is real space, but beyond the walls of the classroom is it's more practice. It's different practice. It's less controlled environment, right? And one thing that I teach in my EJ classes, right? In my environmental justice classes to my students, we talk about interconnectivity as well, but we talk about it in the framework of that our liberation is bound to one another. So one thing I've been thinking a lot about lately, and you're talking about productivity. Productivity really makes me think of like my labor within the capitalist system. So I was trying to like think through how you were talking about it. And I think for me, I would reframe it a little bit to think about praxis. Praxis, theory plus practice, right? And for me, it's something to think about with regards to care and justice in every moment. How do I ensure that my daily praxis in the classroom, beyond the walls of the classroom, is working to displace injustices and lack of care that exist in our society? How can I make my community where I live, the people I interact with, how can I enact a politics of care that works to make the geography a little bit better? Because when we think about the climate crisis, there's a lot that we can't control. So for me, I really think about what can I control? I can control myself. I can control how I interact with other people. I can make sure that I am aware that their liberation is bound to mine. And so that's how I was thinking about all these themes together. Thank you.
Yeah, please.
I was just curious, like, it's really neat that you're doing so much work, like, with the symptoms of what this pollution is doing. I guess I'm just curious, I don't know anything about, like, those nanoparticles. That's not something I never heard about. What's the half-life, what's the half-life? Are they just building and building and building? Are they flowing into the ocean? Are they blowing away to Canada? Or like, what is?
That's a great question. That's a great question. And the reality is that, so there's this theory of, I'm gonna botch it because I haven't looked at this paper in a while. And but there's this theory about different Earth systems. Okay. One of those Earth systems, there's two Earth systems that are of particular interest to me. Okay. Chemical and particulate. Chemical pollution and particulate pollution. These Earth systems are the two. So there's other ones, right? There's like mass extinctions. There's like, you know, these different ecological shifts that are happening, right? Particulate pollution and chemical pollution are the two that we don't know about. We think, scientists think we've already crossed the threshold for these, but TBD. Obviously we're having, you know, we're losing like over 200 species a day is like I saw that in a Nature article, so don't quote me on that, but we're losing a lot of species across the planet right now, right? There's massive amounts of pollution that are going out into our atmosphere that, can we get rid of it? We don't know. So that's a really,
So we aren't doing anything to try to get rid of it because we don't know how. Is that the case?
I mean, it's being captured in some places.
What do you mean by capture?
Well, we've got, you know, HEPA filters in schools now, and we've got, you know,
Dispersed by wind?
sorry, what?
Isn't it dispersed by wind?
Yeah, but where does it go? The particulates don't dissolve, if that's what you're asking.
Say it again.
The particulates don't necessarily dissolve. They get built up, ocean floor, you know, sediment, but that's the unknown about it, is we don't know to what extent. I mean, you know, there's recent news about PFAS, right? Does everyone know about PFAS? It's like this forever chemical.
Oh,
It's forever chemical. It's been found in drinking water and all that. But there's like really great news now that they figured out how to get rid of it, how to, yeah. So I'm gonna leave you on a little lighter note. Yeah, it's yeah.
I was saying that's great to the PFAS, not that you are.
Right.
ending. Yeah, Sue, please go ahead.
Could I ask you a question, Cristina? It seems to me that these, the main sources of air pollution are diesel trucks. Can the adoption of electric trucks at least partially solve the problem?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question because actually in California, they're supposed to be going zero emissions, I think by 2040. So that's huge. That's huge. That's great. It's not zero emissions yet. So are we supposed to just, well, in 2040, theoretically, it'll be, you know, yeah.
You know, net zero emissions?
That's a good question. I don't know. I have to look into that. That's a great question though. I mean, electric, I mean, I'm not an expert on this kind of stuff, but I do know, in terms of, you know, there's like, there was, there's a really important, there was a really important fight for environmental justice, in another neighboring, town in Los Angeles County several years ago with regards to a lithium ion battery plant, recycling plant, and the amount of lead poisoning that has now leached into the surrounding community, and has just destroyed people's health, destroyed people's quality of life. They can't play on their garden, their kids can't play outside. I mean, it's just so, in terms of electric vehicles, I mean, you know, there's a lot to be, but I mean, it's probably part of the solution, at least in the immediate term. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you. So, yeah,
Probably done. Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you all for speaking, and Alexandra, especially you, if you've been up since 4:30 this morning and you're present, at least partly. My thoughts were in sort of responding to the first person who asked, like, what's the theme or what does it relate to? And as I was listening to you all, I just was taking notes, and just the idea of like sort of this transitory period that we're in, and an imbalance, whether it's economic or whether it's power, or whether it's even just the unevenness of how we're living our lives. We're only 40%, 53% present at any given moment. So like this unevenness of how we even approach our interactions. And so anyway, I just appreciated spending time with you. And then two, one of the things I was thinking of, well, all of you were very relevant to my day today. So much we've been hearing about like the gig economy, and what your piece, and Cristina, what your piece made me think of was we're really living in the pollution economy. That it's not the digital economy, or it's the pollution. That's what we live in. It's the pollution economy. We're all sort of affected by it. We all play into it. We all contribute to it. We're all impacted by it. And I don't know what that looks like, but you shed some light on it today. So made me think more about where I fit into it all. Thank you.
So we're just about wrapping up. Does anyone want to add anything else in closing? Yeah, we'll just start. I don't know your name, but yeah, just kind of start it off.
Well, I thought a quick thing. So, Alexandra? Yeah, well, you know, I felt as someone who has had a lot of writer's block of my own, I felt like I was listening to an, you know, evangelical, an apostle preaching the gospel, except that you didn't actually give me the book. Like, so I came away wanting to know.
Prolific moment, theory and practice of mindfulness for writing.
All right, well, but I guess I wanted to know what I mean, because we can't all take your class. What does it feel like, or can you just give us a little concrete sense of what it might be for all of us to just go home and try the next time we sit down to write, to be more mindful?
Well, I think that all of us just carry around that stone backpack of perfectionism, maybe anxiety about writing, doubt, self-doubt, and just to have, I do a meditation activity with my students. I say to them, they're free writing, which just means nonstop writing, whatever comes to mind at the moment, you know, you're free writing. And I say, they watch their breathing. And I say, I'm going to say something to you, and I want you to record your mind waves, the nonverbal responses to what I say, and also mind weeds, the storylines, the pictures, the preconceptions you have to whatever it is good. It's private writing. And I say to them after they watch their breathing, I say, your ability to write is already perfect. I am your teacher and I'm telling you, you are already perfect. And so what happens? They free write. And of course, you can imagine it jumpstarts a lot of internal, right? Your teacher's telling you I'm perfect. What's perfect mean? That word is so loaded on purpose, right? And it jumpstarts a lot of their emotionality about writing. But then as they're free writing, I say to them, keep going, keep going. Can you try to raise, R-A-Z-E, the moment and just get a sense of what it feels like, even for 30 seconds, to stop having that constant little small engine of I'm not good enough running in your head. Just stop that engine, shut it off. You know how you can be in a room, there's a loud noise and you never realized it, and then the engine shuts off, the air conditioning shuts off, and you're like, oh, there's a headache in my head. I can see I had something in my environment. Just to get that raised, R-A-Z-E-D, empty, bare consciousness space about writing will bring people joy, pleasure. It's just a tremendous release. Divorced from product. Who cares what you produce? It's not as important as how you feel about your writing. Who cares what you produce? It's a writer's relationship, a student's relationship to their own writing that is paramount. Everything else comes second, because as you can probably guess, the better people feel about their writing, the more they do it, the better they probably perform. It comes afterwards. So that's what, I don't know, check out the text doc or read the book or something, or there's all kinds of stuff I've done online. I've given lots and lots of talks. And I am evangelical about it because I saw how much I suffered. I saw how much my parents suffered from doubting themselves as people who did not go to college, who were immigrants, who just did not believe in their writing ability. And I've taught for so many years, and I've seen so many students and the pain they carry around. English majors, non-English majors, the pain people, my colleagues, everybody has that backpack they're wearing, and why it's pointless. So I am evangelical. I hope to change the world on this. Thanks. Yeah.
Thanks to each of you again. That was wonderful. Really end.